I thank the gentleman, and I thank those who are with us tonight, because this topic is one of, I think, the most important to our nation. It certainly was key to the foundation of this nation, and the gentleman is right, Mr. Walker, because if you go back and you read that farewell address that Washington gave, it's one of the most inspirational pieces, because he had the power. He had the position, he had the respect of the people, but he did probably the most admirable thing that we've seen in this nation, in that he voluntarily gave it up. Because he knew that the power didn't reside in the president. He knew that the power didn't reside in him as an individual. He understood that the power of this nation stood with the people. And with that power comes a responsibility. It's a responsibility that all of us hold as citizens of the United States of America. For it's truly a privilege and honor to be a citizen in this country. And I hearken back a couple hundred years ago to those who blazed new trails and decided that this nation was going to be an inspired nation, inspired by God, that we weren't bashful about recognizing that God played a role in our lives and that the power of prayer was an important part of our nation. But also incumbent upon that was that every man, woman, and child, every able-bodied person do their part. That we all had accountability and responsibility, not only to take care of ourselves, but to also do what we can to help foster a greater community. See, this was a new idea. It wasn't that way across the world. There were dictators and there were others that really wanted to rule and control people. But the inspiration that our founders had and the foundation of our nation was rooted in this idea that the people had the power. And so fast forward now to those who serve, whether they serve in the armed services, whether they serve in the federal government or the state government, or wherever they might serve, it should be a recognition that we serve the American people, that we serve them. And so as we look at all the issues that face us, whether we're going to spend money, whether we should pass this bill or not, let's remember a couple things, because, and I would mention this to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker, because I know he knows this and I know it, but I want my kids to know it, that as we look at things we do in Congress, as we look at the men and women who serve our nation, most do it in a very admirable way. They're patriotic, they're hardworking, they care about this nation. But we have some that don't really meet that standard. And it is probably most fair, most humane, most decent that we hold people to a high standard. You know, one of the things I want my kids to understand about government, about life in general, is that when they talk about the government and they talk about the federal government, it's really interesting. We'll have this happen in our committee from time to time. We'll say, well, whose money is it? And they'll say, well, it's the government's money. No, it's not. It's the people's money. See, every time we decide to spend money in Congress, what we're really deciding is, should we pull money out of somebody's pocket? Should we pull money out of your wallet, take it over here, and hand it to somebody else? Now, there's some worthwhile causes to do that, right? There's some worthwhile things to do. The protection of our nation for our armed services. I buy that. I get that. But we're spending far too much money on too many things. We can't be all things to all people. So going back to my original premise here, as I try to teach my own kids and try to remember myself, we have to be exceptionally responsible stewards of these assets and resources that aren't ours. They're an individual's. For you see, at the heart of this is something that I think President Washington understood, that the most powerful thing upon our nation is the power of the people, and it's their own self-determination that should rule the day. You limit their self-determination, the more you regulate them, and the more you pull that money directly out of their pockets and give it to somebody else. Now, there's room for regulation, there's room for certain things in the public good, but I tell you, most of what happens, most of what goes on in Washington, it's far too much. It's excessive. And we have to remember at its core that accountability and responsibility for those of us that are fortunate enough to serve in a public role is imperative, but it's also imperative that each individual takes upon themselves their own accountability and their own responsibility. As able-bodied men and women, children, you got to pull your own weight. You got to carry your own bucket. You got to do what you got to do, not only to help yourself, but to help your community, your friends and loved ones as well. And that's the heart of what I think the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker, brings to this body. I know he cares about it passionately. It's what we're here talking about tonight. And there's a host of examples where we're not holding people accountable, and we want to change that. I hope we're able to talk about that a bit tonight. But for the moment, I would say to the gentleman, thank you for allowing me to participate. And with that, I'll yield back for the moment. Thank you.